People have weaponized music for thousands of years, from the walls of Jericho to the Vietnam War. Whether it was playing the real Slim Shady for hours on end to torture prisoners of war, or blasting Baby Shark throughout the city to deter homeless people, today I've gathered 4 different ways in which music has been used as a weapon, starting off with music being used as a deterrent. So to start off with something a little bit lighter before we get into the more serious stuff, music has been used for decades to deter people from gathering in certain places. In the 80s and 90s, places such as 7-Eleven were having issues with loiterers gathering outside of their convenience stores. All types of people would hang out outside of these stores, like skaters and teenagers. One article from 1991 even says, "A 7-Eleven store plagued by loitering drug dealers, prostitutes, and pimps has installed elevator music and turned up the volume to drive the undesirables away." They would play a type of music called muzak, which is a brand of background music that you would hear in an elevator or a retail store. They figured the loiterers wouldn't like that type of music and they'd leave, and it worked.
It's annoying, I don't know, I can't think of anyone who would want to listen to it.
I want to get the hell out of here as soon as I can, I'll tell you that.
One 7-Eleven manager even said, "If I notice people hanging around, I'll turn up the volume and they'll leave within 10 minutes. Many other cities like Dallas, Seattle, Portland, and San Francisco have been playing classical music in public spaces to deter other unwanted people. However, a much more controversial use of music being used as a deterrent is in 2019 when a pavilion in West Palm Beach, Florida started playing annoying songs like Baby Shark and Raining Tacos to get rid of the homeless people in the park.
It's raining tacos.
Similar to other tactics used to deter homeless people like spikes and bars installed on benches, they would play the songs late at night to discourage homeless people from gathering and sleeping there. This has caused a ton of controversy, with a lot of people saying that it's inhumane and homeless people deserve to be treated better. There were also local pedestrians and workers that claimed it was very annoying to listen to while they were in the area.
I mean, I don't work for the city, but I know city workers that I've talked to. It drives them nuts, and it's rather loud too. Throughout the park, they can also blast it on those speakers, so it just gets annoying.
But the reason music works to deter people is because when you hear music you don't like, the brain actually lowers dopamine production and it makes people want to avoid that music. Music has also been used many times to deter protesters, like recently when police in New Zealand played songs like Let It Go from Frozen and Baby Shark to get rid of anti-vaccine mandate protesters. And while music being used to deter people is a pretty tame example of weaponized music, we've also seen music used as a means of torture and interrogation. Music being used in torture and interrogation is a form of psychological warfare. Many countries have used music in this way, such as Greece, Israel, and of course, the United States. The CIA is especially well known for doing this, and they even have playlists compiled full of songs that they would use. They would play a variety of different genres to torture prisoners, like hard rock, metal, and more annoying songs like the Meow Mix theme song. I've never heard that before, but it does sound extremely annoying. A lot of the time, they would actually play 2 or more songs at the same time, creating a dissonant and harsh sound. According to music psychologists, when dissonant music is played, it activates brain regions that are associated with the perception of negative emotions. One of the most well-known instances of music being used for torture is in Guantanamo Bay, a detention camp in Cuba that the US used in the early 2000s during the War on Terror, and to this day there are still prisoners there. They had something called the Gitmo playlist, which was a playlist full of songs from artists like Pearl Jam that were blasted at prisoners. They also played heavily distorted Sesame Street music, which just sounded terrifying. A former prison guard from Guantanamo Bay says they would keep prisoners in uncomfortable positions and play these songs for over 12-hour periods to torture the prisoners so that they could eventually be interrogated.
It's not the torture of like a movie, we don't have people wired up to racks, and we don't have, we're not pulling out toenails. What we are doing is leaving them in really uncomfortable positions on the floor in the cold for hours and hours and hours, listening to music that's way too loud, that they hate on many cultural bases, just things to piss them off and break them down.
The CIA actually declassified a document that was essentially a guideline they had for torture and interrogation, and there was a section on white noise and loud music. They were allowed to play music as loud as a highway for up to 18 hours a day, and music as loud as a jackhammer for up to 2 hours a day. They also allowed up to 72 hours of sleep deprivation by playing music and other sounds. However, the majority of the document is still classified. Like I said, the reason that they were playing music to torture these prisoners is so that they could get information out of them. The music was played as a means to isolate them. It was so loud that they couldn't even hear their own thoughts, and they would do and say anything just so the music would be turned off. On top of the music, they would also blindfold them, put mittens over their hands, beat them, and try to rid them of any senses so they felt completely isolated. Moazzam Beg is a British citizen who moved to Pakistan, and the US military thought he was working with the Taliban, so they took him as a prisoner for 3 years. He was subjected to the musical torture and was interrogated over 300 times even though he was innocent. This is how he describes the musical torture.
And that's the point, to put somebody in an almost vegetative state where they are simply ready to say anything, comply with anything, only so that the music can be turned down.
After learning that their music was used to torture prisoners of war, many musicians began to protest against this. There was an initiative called 0 Decibel, which was protesting against musical torture and tried to get the United Nations to enforce the Convention Against Torture. Many artists and bands spoke up about this issue, including Rage Against the Machine, Pearl Jam, System of a Down, and many more. But it wasn't just the United States who employed this technique, because many other countries have done this as well. In the 1950s, both the Koreans and the Chinese were some of the first to do this during the Korean War. China and North Korea were fighting against South Korea and the United States, and they captured over 7,000 Americans. While in prison, they tortured these captured Americans with music. The United States learned about this and began performing experiments on test subjects in regards to musical torture. They said it was to better equip the troops to withstand torture, but in reality, as we all know, they were just practicing these methods to use on future prisoners. One US military instructor even admitted that the techniques are based on Chinese communist techniques used during the Korean War to elicit false confessions, including stripping detainees of their clothing, placing them in stress positions, putting hoods over their heads, disrupting their sleep, treating them like animals, subjecting them to loud music and flashing lights, and exposing them to extreme temperatures. More recently, Russia has been seen using music to torture prisoners as well. A British man named Sean Pinner was captured by Russia while fighting in Ukraine. After being released due to a secret deal made between Russia and Ukraine, he revealed that music was included in his harsh torture. On top of being stabbed, electrocuted, and hardly fed, he was forced to listen to the soundtrack of Mamma Mia for 24 hours a day. But if you thought that music being used in torture was crazy, the way in which music has been used in war is much more bizarre. And I'm not talking about march songs or anthems or motivational music, that's all pretty obvious. What I'm talking about is music that's actually directed at the enemy. In the Vietnam War, the US military had loudspeakers on tanks, aircrafts, and even backpacks to play music directed at the Viet Cong. They had something called the Wandering Soul Campaign. It was based on the Vietnamese belief that if you don't die and aren't buried close to your home, your soul will wander forever. US engineers took weeks to make music and voice recordings to play in battle. They then would play eerie, sad funeral music that would have the voices of fathers saying they are wandering and children calling their dads back home. It was pretty terrifying. They were attempting to strike fear in the Vietnamese and demoralize them, although we aren't sure how effective it was as the United States lost that war. But that was not the only time the United States has used music in war. During the Battle of Fallujah in Iraq, which had the most casualties in the Iraq War, both the United States Army and the Islamists were blaring music at each other. One article from 2004 states that US troops were playing rock songs from artists like AC/DC, Guns N' Roses, and Eminem. They were hoping to grate on the nerves of the Sunni Muslim city's gunmen and give a laugh to the Marines along the front line. A US military spokesman said, "It's not so much the music as the sound. It's like throwing a smoke bomb. The aim is to disorient and confuse the enemy to gain a tactical advantage." He also said, "Western music is not the Iraqis' thing." In response to the US playing music, the insurgents were playing music and speeches in Arabic from the mosque loudspeakers. The reason that both sides were playing music is because it's a form of psychological warfare. Both sides were trying to get into each other's heads. The US military even had psychological warfare units that would be instructed to play music at the Iraqis. On top of the music, to further get into the insurgents' heads, the Marines were playing sounds like babies crying, men screaming, screeches, and dogs barking. They would also play messages in Arabic that translate, "May all the ambulances in Fallujah have enough fuel to pick up the bodies of the Mujahideen." The Battle of Fallujah was also the first time that the United States deployed a weapon called the Long Range Acoustic Device, or the LRAD for short. And that leads me into my next way in which music is weaponized, and that's when music is used as a literal weapon. Now, it isn't always music that's used as a weapon. Sometimes it's random random sounds or frequencies, but because it's some of both, I decided that it counts. Originally, the LRADs were used for crowd control and they were mounted on cars, but they were later turned into weapons. The LRADs are large compact speakers that were so powerful they could burst eardrums and cause nausea. Some people even refer to them as sound cannons.
It's a powered loudspeaker that works at very long distances with perfect clarity. That is not what a normal loudspeaker does.
The sounds they play are so loud that it sounds like it's coming from every direction or inside the head of the person being hit with it, heavily disorienting them. LRADs can also be set to a burst mode where they fire rounds of intense acoustic energy, which can incapacitate people, sometimes causing nosebleeds or leaving you shaking inside. It's kind of like Dosu's attack from Naruto. I know it's not a real thing in like the real world, but the hidden sound village was really cool, so I had to mention it. The LRADs were used in the Battle of Fallujah to bombard the city with Metallica songs and probably other songs as well. Spokesman for the military said they work very well in cities because the sound can bounce off of all the walls. These devices are loud enough to cause permanent hearing damage. There's also a similar device called the Squawk Box, and there isn't too much information on it because the British tried to deny its existence, but basically it was an earlier version of the LRAD and it causes similar things, and it can even cause people to pass out. And supposedly the Germans had a similar sound device called the Luftkanon. I don't know how to speak German. And apparently this device was capable of killing a man with sound pressure in 30 to 40 seconds. But there's nothing new under the sun because even the Aztecs use music as a weapon, or at least that's what people think. Now I'm only putting this in this section because it's super cool and interesting. It's probably much more similar to psychological warfare like I was talking about earlier, but it kind of looks like a weapon, so I'm going to put it here. And it's my video, so I can do whatever I want. And that weapon is the Aztec death whistle. The Aztec death whistle is a whistle that was discovered by archaeologists in the 90s. Unfortunately, it can't actually cause death like the name implies, so it's not super cool. Instead, they were shaped like skulls and created a very scary and dissonant whistle that sounded like someone screaming. Experts aren't sure exactly what they were used for, with some speculating they were used for spiritual purposes, but a lot of people think that they were used in battle to terrify the enemies. This is what it sounded like. A lot of the information and clips in this video are from a documentary on torture music by Christopher Surf, a man who made music for Sesame Street and was disappointed to find out how his music was being used. It's a really good hour-long documentary, so I highly recommend you guys check it out. I'm going to put the link in the description below. Other than that, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.